Next up, Carlo Sound. Not Carlos Sound, but Carlo Sound. I was just talking to some of the family a while ago, and they said they've had people come to them and said, "Oh yes, I know Carlos personally." Also meet the daughters over here because they have on the legacy line of Carlo Sound t-shirts with us today. Next slide. They had their start. This is John, Logan, and Richard Carpenter. And they had a folk group, and the sound business, the live sound business grew out of that. They formed a company and were later, which you'll see in the video here in a moment, asked if they could do sound for the Johnny Cash show. And also became the touring sound for the Allman Brothers band. Next up. They ran 2 rigs, and as you see there, at one point, they didn't see each other for about 18 months, so that's a great start to things. Some of the artists that they worked for in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Allman Brothers Band, Leonard Ronstadt, Little River Band, Procol Harum, the Eagles, Jackson Browne, Black Oak, Arkansas, Dan Fogelberg, linked to another recipient today, Ike and Tina Turner, Karen Carpenter, Pink Floyd, Poco, America, Oak Ridge Boys, and Robin Trower, to name but a few. And the video, please.
Can y'all hear all right? We'd like to thank Carlo Sound. That's the best sound system around the whole world. They might have a better one on Mars.
We started Carlo Sound on January the 19th, 1970. It initiated really, I guess, back in the roots of April of 1965, when I first met Richard Carpenter. I was performing in a nightclub in Knoxville, Tennessee, which was my home. He and I were both going to the University of Tennessee at the time. I was already in that position in that club, and he came through the doorway looking at the stage, and I looked over across the way, and I saw his demeanor and everything, and I thought immediately, that guy wants my job. So I figured out shortly that he was just more interested in being able to perform in that club. One thing led to another, and we ended up in the same group playing folk music as it was in the mid-60s in this club. And while we were there and going to the University of Tennessee, we were also asked to join a group called the UT Singers. And so we joined the UT Singers, and the director, conductor, if you will, of the UT Singers was a fellow who had been touring with a group called Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians. This fellow, Ted Roberts, the director, got an audition for us to perform for Mr. Waring when he came to town and played at the theater there in Knoxville. We performed for him, and he liked what he heard and hired us to work at his Shawnee Inn at Delaware Watergate, Pennsylvania. Actually, Shawnee, Pennsylvania. And we performed there during the summer, and at the end of the summer, he asked us to join and become Pennsylvanians and tour with him, which we did for a couple of years. In the process of that 2 years, he had a sound guy who was his engineer, toured with him. And Bruce Kirby was his name. And he ended up, as we began to leave Waring and start our own touring stuff and doing things on our own as a band, he sold us our electronics, our sound system. And so we used that. And then at that time, we left and started our own group. Fast forward to December of 1969, the Johnny Cash TV show was getting ready to start its second season, and they were doing that in the Opera House in Nashville. And turned out that the guy who had the sound for the job of producing the sound in the Ryman Auditorium for the Johnny Cash TV show was the same guy who was the sound guy for Fred Waring. Well, they had a trucker strike, and he couldn't get his equipment from Los Angeles to Nashville to start the show. So he knew us, he called us, could we rent your stuff to do the sound for the Johnny Cash TV show? And we said, well, yes, I think we can work that out. As it happened, just immediately prior to that, Richard and I had been in a band that we were playing together in Huntsville, Alabama, December, Christmas time stuff. And we were using the same sound system there that Bruce Kirby had sold us. So in that process of Christmas time and all, Richard went home to Nashville where his parents were living. I stayed down there because the Coasters were coming, Cornell Gunther and the Coasters, and they didn't have a sound system. So lo and behold, and for a period of 2 days, I got to be a coaster. I played bass in the band and yakety sax and Don't Talk Back and all that while having the sound system. And then the next, on New Year's Eve, I did sound for the Glenn Miller Orchestra. So those were the first sort of things, and they paid us to do that. It was like, wow, what a novel idea. So I called Richard and told him the money they were going to pay us. And he said, boy, that's a heck of an idea. And immediately on the heels of that, that's when Bruce Kirby called us about renting our sound equipment for the Johnny Cash TV show. That was such an interesting way to it was like jumping from one career to another immediately. At that point, we had a sound company, if you will. So somewhere between that point at which we got involved with the Johnny Cash TV show and the 19th of January, we realized we had to have come up with a name. So they had to write a check to somebody, and we didn't want it to be us because we didn't want the liability. So one thing led to another. We were sitting around a breakfast table, and I suggested to him, I said, well, I think for a sound company, maybe Low Car Sound. What do you think about that? He said, no, I think Low Car sounds much too Neanderthal. And so, how about Carlo? And I said, I knew you'd do that. I knew you would do that.
Thank you. Thanks, JD.
Unfortunately, Richard is no longer with us, but the two people we do have here is John Logan and Margaret Carpenter will be accepting. Come on up.
On behalf of Low Car Sound, I would like to. I'd like to recognize a few people that were very significant in our growth and how we came to be. Johnny Rosen being one of them, who's here. Fanta Sound was his company. And David Sherman, who is here somewhere, right up there. And so many more that are too numerous to really name, but I would like to say thank you so much for this honor. It was one of those things that came totally unexpected, and on behalf of Richard and yours truly, I would like to say a very special thank you, Mike and John and the society. It's a real honor. Thank you.
Rich loved Carlo Sound, and he loved this industry, and he would have been thrilled with this award. I just want to thank you all.